Okay. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this most recent version of Building the Scottish State with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught, on the 15th of September, 2022. And I have the great pleasure of, prior to the Yestival, which was supposed to be this Sunday, but it has been postponed. And Tommy, we have a great pleasure to welcome Tommy Sheridan to the show to talk about the Yestival and all things independence related. So first of all, Tommy, thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure yet again, Mark. Thanks for the invitation. It was really appreciated because we did believe this was going to be on the eve of the Yestival, because 18th September is a very important date, as we know. It was the date 8 years ago when we had our first referendum, and we were narrowly defeated, but we never lost heart, and we've kept going ever since, and we're determined to have another go, and we've got a date, 19th October 23. The date's already been said. The bill has been published in the Scottish Parliament, so we have to redouble our efforts. We have to really try and get the independence movement going again, united, determined, and although we're disappointed, very, very disappointed over the last couple of days about the postponement in relation to this Sunday, a postponement that was based on discussions the council had with our application organiser. John Park is the guy who applied for the licences, applied for permission to use from East Kilbride. Yes, and John is one of the original Hope Over Fear organisers, and he was left in no doubt whatsoever by the council officials that they were pulling the plug, that they were going to have to withdraw permission, apparently based, I've not seen this in detail, but apparently based on police intelligence that there was to be some organised unionist disruption if the event had went ahead on Sunday. English Defence League, apparently organising buses from England, Union Bears, an organisation affiliated with the Rangers Football Club, was apparently going to try and organise disruption. So we had a dilemma. We go ahead, which is what we all wanted to do, and confront whatever came our way, but in the understanding that it would be a reduced turnout because a lot of people would decide not to bring their children because they perhaps feared confrontation. It's not been the first time that independence events have been attacked from unionist elements. So that was an option, or try and book an alternative date. And we were presented with only 3 dates that were alternatives: 1st October, 8th October, 15th October. Our belief, our firm belief in the Hope Over Fear camp is that we need to build pressure before the 11th and 12th October Supreme Court hearing, when they will deliberate on the Scottish Government request to allow Indy Ref 2 to be held on the 19th October next year. We want to get as many people on the streets, unite the independence movement, to say to these Supreme Court judges, to say to the unrepresentative Westminster Tories, we don't care what you say, you don't have a mandate here in Scotland. The SNP have won the last 3 general elections, clearly. They've won the last 2 Scottish elections, clearly. They have an absolute cast iron mandate for Indy Ref 2, and no unelected judge, no unrepresentative Tory has the right to say, no, you're not getting your say. So we didn't want to meet on the 15th of October, which would be after the Supreme Court hearing. We wanted to meet before the Supreme Court hearing. So that left 2 dates, 1st October or 8th October. 1st October has already been taken up by All Under One Banner, who have organised a march for independence in Edinburgh. So it would be absolutely stupid for us to organise an independence event on the same day as another independence event. So we went for the 8th of October. We're calling for everybody in the independence movement. Get yourselves to Edinburgh on the 1st of October and march for our right to be heard. And then the following week, 8th October, get yourself to Glasgow. Get yourself to Freedom Square in Glasgow and declare without fear or without favour that we demand our vote. We demand the right to cast our vote next 19th October on the constitutional future of Scotland. The Scottish Parliament has already passed the idea of us having that referendum. They have now published the bill. It's there in black and white. The referendum bill is there. The Supreme Court is to be consulted. Personally, I would rather the Supreme Court was told rather than consulted, because I don't think there is any court in the land that should be allowed to take over our inalienable right to self-determination. The idea that you ask permission from those who have got you under lock and key, whether you can actually escape or not, is nonsense. The Treaty of Union 1707 was a voluntary union,
Yes.
So we should be able to voluntarily withdraw from that union. And from our point of view, Mark, it's vital that we get thousands in Edinburgh on the 1st and thousands in Glasgow on the 8th in order to put pressure on the SNP politicians not to bend the knee, not to quiver, to stand and be counted.
Right on. So I just wanted to mention quickly an apology regarding Pepper Jock, who was supposed to be with us tonight, but due to unforeseen circumstances, he was unable to. So anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. So so you view that the Supreme Court decision as a foregone conclusion, that they're going to evoke Westminster sovereignty, the Westminster Parliament can do anything they want, and that under the Scotland Act, Scotland, they do not have powers over the Constitution. Thus reserved for Westminster. So Westminster, any referendum held outside of a Section 30 order would be the Scotland doesn't have the power to do that. Is that your anticipation and understanding of the case?
My anticipation, Mark, is exactly as you've outlined there, and that is that they will knock us back. They'll say, no, under the Scotland Act 1998, you don't have permission over constitutional affairs. That doesn't mean that the Scottish Parliament can't say categorically, fair dues, you're not going to give us a Section 30 order, but we're going to have a consultative referendum anyway. We understand that you might not accept the result of this vote, but we believe we have, through 5 election victories in a parliamentary democracy, one parliamentary victory would be enough, but the SNPs get 5. They've won each of the last 3 general elections, 15, 17 and 19, and they've won each of the last 2 Scottish Parliament elections since NDREF won in 2014, they won in 16 and they won in 21. So 5 election victories in a parliamentary democracy is cast iron. There is no question that there is a mandate for NDREF 2. Now, it would be nice if Westminster says, we agree, you're right, we live in a parliamentary democracy, you're right, and we'll honour whatever result is. But we know that the only reason they agreed to it in 13 was because they thought we would get gubbed. They thought that there was no chance that people in Scotland would vote for independence. So they said, on you go, and we'll accept the result. Now, we gave them a fright. They were shitting themselves. If you look at the last weekends before 18 September 2014, they called in all of the big business leaders, all of the banks. They were calling in every favour. They were telling the trade union barons, you must get your members to vote no. They were saying the B&Q was going to withdraw. They were saying the Royal Bank of Scotland was going to close. They were saying there was going to be thousands of jobs losses. They were absolutely bricking it because we were looking like a victory. As it happened, that last few days, and very few of us will ever forget the role of the Daily Record and the vow and the front page, and Gordon Brown coming in to try and shore up that soft Labour no vote, because at least a third of Labour supporters support independence, and it looked like they were coming for independence. However, bringing out Gordon Brown, bringing out the Daily Record, bringing out the Vow, managed to frighten just enough people to swing it 55-45. It's clear in my mind that we are starting this time, Mark. We're not starting on 25% support as we were away back in 13. We're starting on at least 45, probably 50-50. And the idea that we're not going to win once the campaign starts is nonsense. When people realise that what we are doing here in Scotland is not being subsidised by England, we are subsidising England. People have to understand. We send more money every single year to Westminster than we get back in the block grant. We, if we're independent, would have the opportunity, Mark, as you know, and you've discussed it so many times in the show, we would have the opportunity not to have a cuts budget, but to have a growth budget all across Scotland. The only point I would make, Mark, I'm sorry to go on a wee bit about this, but this point's important, and that is the Scottish Parliament, in terms of the claim of right that has never been superseded. The claim of right, 1689 was
and Charles affirmed it when he made his oath the other day.
Well, you know, I'm coming on to that bit as well. But even after 1707, the claim of right was never, ever superseded. It exists. It's there. It's a legal document. We do not have the parliamentary sovereignty that England has. England has that, I accept. That's their English Parliament. But that has not been the position in Scotland. Prior to the 1707 Treaty of the Union, we have to remember Scotland never gave up its nationhood. We didn't enter the Treaty of Union and say Scotland no longer exists, we're now Britain. We entered the Treaty of Union as a nation, and we remain a nation. And we've got our own laws, we've got our own education, we've got our own claim of right. It is there. And that claim of right gives us the ability to say to the world, see this referendum we're holding, we believe it should be recognised. And even if the Unionists, Mark, as is very, very possible, they turn around next year or later next month and say, we don't care, we're boycotting the Scottish referendum, we're boycotting it. We should say, is that right? No problem. We're going to get more than 50% of the people of Scotland to vote, and out of those people who vote, we're going to win hands down. And then we're going to go to United Nations, we're going to go to European Union, and we're going to say, here is our mandate to be recognised as an independent nation. And if we've got that, by the way, I don't see any way that they can refuse to recognise us.
Yeah. A question from Lars of Mars Q. How do I convince a supporter of independence who thinks these marches don't have any impact or go out and take part in one? What is the utility of it? I mean, there's been many demonstrations, there's been many marches before and after the referendum, and here we are at this point where both, either a Section 30 is not going to happen. Maybe the Supreme Court is going to refuse it. In what sense are these marches and rallies? Why are they important?
I think I can feel the pain of Lars and every other independent supporter, because I recall 17, 18, the marches we held in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, they were absolutely huge. They were outstanding.
I was born in Edinburgh when there was 10,000 people, I think, or at least. I mean,
well,
I was down at the bottom. I sort of went fast down the Royal Mile, and I just saw people coming over.
Mark,
it never ended. It was just amazing.
Mark, there was clearly in excess of 100,000 there. There was clearly in excess of that. We'd arrived. Some of the march had arrived in the park, and some hadn't left Holyrood. So it was absolutely humongous. And by the way, it was pissing a rain as well that day, so it didn't stop people coming out. And that was on the back, if you remember, the Brexit vote was in 16. Mm-hmm. The anger that people felt, because one of the promises, and by the way, I'm saying all this, and I'm not a big fan of the European Union at all. I think it's a big bosses club, and if it's up to me, an independent Scotland wouldn't be in it. I'd rather just be in EFTA. I'd rather be in the free trade agreement. However, there is a democratic argument, Mark. There's a democratic argument.
We've done research on that, and we've actually contacted EFTA, and they would be more than, if as long as Scotland has the Scottish government has the capacity to negotiate and abide by treaties, there's no problem.
Why wouldn't they?
And they made it totally clear. I don't know
why wouldn't they. Norway has that existence. I think Norway has got the best of both worlds because they've got access to the markets of Europe, but they don't have to accept the diktats of the European Parliament, which is, in my opinion, a very undemocratic parliament.
And also they can participate in European programs a la carte. For example, the Erasmus student exchange. They can.
It's the best of both worlds.
And they can do that. They have to pay. They do have to pay into the funds if they're participating in a program.
Yes, of course.
What they want, I mean, it's such a no-brainer.
Whether you join a gym or a snooker club, you pay a fee, and that gets you into the club, and you accept that there's annual fees. So we accept that there's annual fees in being part of the European Free Trade Agreement. But to me, that's better than being a member of the European Union. But this is the point. Scotland should decide. Scotland should decide, not England. And what happened in 16, Scotland voted to stay, England voted to leave. What then happens? We were promised in 14 by Mr. Cameron and Mr. Brown and Mr. Darling and all the other unionist fearmongers. They said, if you vote for independence, you'll never be allowed to be in the European Union. You'll get taken out of the European Union. And actually what happened was the very opposite. The very opposite. Those who voted no, thinking it would keep you in the European Union, were actually lied to. Because what has happened, people voted no, and we are dragged out the European Union. So I think there was a lot of impetus and democratic anger, even for people like me who don't like the European Union. I was still angry that we were getting dragged out of something that the people of Scotland had voted to stay in. Right. And I think that fed into the marches in 17 and 18. They were absolutely huge. We were, I think, on the brink in 19. It looked to me, after the general election victory, which was a significant victory again for the SNP at the general election, Boris Johnson won in England, but he didn't win in Scotland. They get less votes. They get less votes in 19 than they did in 17, so they were less popular. And therefore, the impetus was behind the idea of a referendum in 20. There was no doubt in my mind, and all of us took part in those marches, and I think we were confident. And then COVID happened, Mark, and we could discuss a whole show about what should have been the response to COVID. Personally, I think the SNP were wrong to suspend the independence campaign to deal with COVID. I think they should have dealt with COVID and advanced the cause for independence, because I don't think Scotland can ever recover in terms of paying carers and health workers proper wages and investing in our public services. We can never recover while we're in the British Union. However, we could have fought the COVID, got people together and campaigned for independence. That's my opinion.
I totally. I mean, they held a Scottish election during that time. Why couldn't they have held a referendum?
Well, they said things like, it would be divisive, and then held an election. There's nothing more divisive than an election, for goodness sakes. To me, it was a cop-out. It was a cop-out. People will disagree. You're entitled to disagree. But what it did do is it removed momentum from the independence campaign. It was like taking the wheels off the bus. And we, I think, have been parked in a lay-by for far too long. That has led, I think, because when you don't have a focus, then the independence movement becomes maybe a wee bit insular and inward-looking. And sometimes there was a lot of wee squabbles and people falling out with each other. I hope that's behind us. I hope that's behind us, and I hope that we've started to tie our ropes together again. What is clear is that we are better, we are much stronger, and there's more chance of us being heard when we're united. And that's why, for instance, the idea of choosing the Yestival to be on the same day as the All Under One Banner march
Thanks,
would be
Nancy.
absolutely wrong, fundamentally. And that's why we're saying, let's get along. Let's support both events. Let's say to All Under One Banner, we're coming. Everybody should be there in Edinburgh on the 1st. And then we're going to hopefully be able to address that rally and say, come next week, let's get to Glasgow. And I know what Lars is saying. What use is all of that, right? Well, here's the point. See if there's a few hundred march in Edinburgh and a few hundred assemble in Glasgow. I'm be honest with you, Lars. It won't be much use at all. That's honest. See if there are thousands in Edinburgh, thousands in Glasgow. What it does is it exerts pressure on the political leadership, the de facto political leadership of the independence movement, which is the SNP. If there are thousands saying to them, hey, you guys, we voted for you to deliver independence. You were sent to Westminster to settle up, not to settle down. Now you must deliver. That's why it would make a difference, because it puts pressure on the people who are there to step up to the plate and actually give us the chance to vote again on the 19th of October next year.
Okay, I wanted to address the mechanics of the. Okay, so let's just assume that the Supreme Court, the no Section 30, forget it. The Supreme Court says, oh, Westminster is always right. Westminster sovereignty always prevails. It always wins. So whatever you want to do, it's, if Westminster isn't going to let it happen, it can't happen, which is probably going to be the case. So you'll have people saying, oh, it's an illegal referendum or this or that. There's the possibility that some of the town councils won't participate with regarding the ballots, and also just the whole way in which the last referendum was conducted. For example, in Spain, in Catalonia, but in Spain in general, when they vote, they count the votes at the voting station. I mean, they just, at the end of the day, take it out. You got people watching, they count, the ballots, with observers, and then they send in the results. When I was at the Emirates Arena in 2014, witnessing the vote, and whether there was fraud or not, I certainly can't prove, but the scope for fraud was massive. I mean, you had private companies taking the ballot boxes from the voting stations to the Emirates Arena. You had all kinds of, irregularities, let's just say. Also, I read the SIRA, the Scottish Independence Referendum Act, that was passed by Westminster to allow for the 2014 referendum, and it had clauses in it like because the private, they hired private, a lot of it was privatized, and they hired private companies to store the ballots, and they were under obligation to destroy the ballots after a couple of months. And so even if they wanted to do a recount, they couldn't have done it because they were legally obliged to destroy the ballots. And I'm really concerned that if the referendum does take place next year, that it not be that the Scottish government is able to control it. It's totally transparent. Everything's totally transparent, so we don't get so Scotland doesn't get defrauded possibly again. I don't have any evidence for fraud, but the scope was massive, even if there wasn't. So I was just, what do you think? And this ties in with Tommy's question, Julie's question. Tommy, do you think a referendum would be interfered with if Westminster has anything to do with it? Could we manage to do the referendum independently? And I think that fits perfectly with the question I just asked. So just in terms of the mechanics of a referendum that is not authorized by Westminster and that the Supreme Court has ruled the Scottish government does not have the authority to hold.
Mark, since 1999, we have ran the Scottish Health Service. We've ran the Scottish education system. We've ran the Scottish criminal justice system. We've ran transport in Scotland. Some people say each of those things have got weaknesses, and I would agree, but we've ran them from Scotland. The idea that we couldn't run a referendum, I mean, come on. If you can run the health service, why could you not run a referendum? And the idea also that you need town halls to participate. I think we need to drag ourselves in to the 21st century here. I mean, my daughter's just applied for her provisional license. She had to provide certain details, including a national insurance number. People have to apply for passports.
Sure.
They supply national insurance numbers. Sometimes if you're applying for other things like your Scot card, then you have to use passport numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not moving into a 21st century where we have e-voting, where we allow people to vote using their identity online? Mm-hmm. There seems to be enough protection when it comes to driving licenses and Scot cards.
Bank cards, so sure, yeah.
We already have the technology, and wouldn't that allow us then to move away from what I think was a big problem, Mark, was the counting of postal votes in different venues from some of the big counting centres during 14. Many of the ballot boxes been removed by private companies, and some of the ballot boxes, I'm told, I never witnessed it myself, but I'm telling you what I've been told, and that is that some of the ballot boxes appear to have been opened before they got to the
I heard that.
So, if we're worried about all of that, then that to me is like saying we're going to drive to London. So once you've made that decision, you're going to drive to London, you arrange to get petrol put in the motor, right? And getting the petrol in the motor, it's a simple, straightforward thing to do.
I know
Once we have decided to hold the referendum, then we get in place the mechanics of actually delivering it. These things are incidental to the actual principle of taking the decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. We don't need to have to comply with EU competition law while we are rebuilding an international Scotland. EFTA would allow Scotland to choose Scottish companies to rebuild our country and keep the revenue within our borders. I believe that's true, and I think that EU membership may be something for the future, but it's not a happy institution right now. I mean, with everything that's going on, and EFTA would be a much it would allow Scotland to have much more sovereignty than it does under the EU. So,
well, Mark, why on earth would you? In my opinion, why on earth would we fight so hard to regain our sovereignty to then give so much of it back to the European Union? It's just nonsensical to me. However, there are other people within the independence movement who support that position. That's fine. See, after independence, let's have an informed debate. Let's have a discussion and another referendum about whether you join the European Union or not. I'll be saying no, others will be saying yes. Let the people of Scotland decide.
But it's important to join EFTA quickly because EFTA membership can be done in literally weeks. I was assured of that by an official from EFTA that because I asked about EFTA in the context of if in 2019, last year, right? Yeah, losing track of year. When there was the last Holyrood election, 2021, sorry, in May of 2021. And so I asked them, this was in February and I asked them if the Scottish government uses the Holyrood referendum as a plebiscite on independence, would you consider Scotland's application? And he said, yeah. If all Scotland would have to do once it again the only thing that Scotland lacks at this point, as in terms of becoming a state, is under the Montevideo Convention of 1933. It stipulated any state to be a state, you have to have a territory, a people, a recognized government, that kind of thing. Scotland has everything except for the authority to engage in international relations, which is the only thing missing for Scotland to apply to EFTA. Once it did, and they're not even that specific on what a state means, but again, the only thing lacking is the ability to sign and negotiate international treaties.
Yeah.
So I mean, and nothing about EFTA membership would prevent Scotland from joining the EU later. The key is they would be in the single market. They would be negotiating with the EU out in a position of economic, stability, because they're in the single market, and not in a position of economic desperation. They say, "Oh, we got to get in the single market." They can do it, as we say in France, tranquillement, tranquilly. Not under the pressure of being out of the single market and at that disadvantage. So. So keep the ballot boxes in Scotland at the ballot station. It was rigged from the start. We've got a few comments on the prior.
I think there was one question there that I wouldn't mind addressing, Mark. It was a question. I think it was a guy, Paul, and he addressed the question. I think he said it was 50-50 on whether he was going to vote for independence or not. But he said, how could we in an independent Scotland guarantee that we would keep the energy prices down? Right, and I think it's a great question, and it goes to the very, very core, Mark. For me, it goes to the core of what independence is about, because independence for me has always been a means to an end. Independence can never, in my opinion, be an end in itself. If all you do is change the flags above the municipal buildings and everything else stays the same, to be fair, it's not worth it. Because if pensions are still as low, if the living wage is still as low, and if energy prices are still as high, then what have we achieved by independence? Independence gives us the tools to improve the pensions, to give the living wage a reality so that you don't need to claim supplementary benefits while you're working, to do away forever with a horrible, horrible term that I think should be banned from the English language, the working poor. The working poor. If you're working, why the hell are you poor? That should be banned. And in an independent Scotland, let's make sure it's banned. And in an independent Scotland, it's particularly with a country so rich in energy resources, the ability to generate not just wind, wave and solar power, but to have access to gas and electricity, we could have a publicly owned energy supplier that would ensure that all of our energy prices are there for affordability, for safety, and making sure that they were as efficient as possible, not to make profits for your BPs and your Shells and all of the other electricity generating companies who, by the way, are only private companies that grew out of the privatisation in 1989 under Thatcher. We have to remember, Mark, I don't know if you and I are of a similar generation, and you and I probably remember watching Rory Bremner. Rory Bremner, I loved these shows. He was a fantastic...
I've actually haven't lived in the UK, so I'm not familiar.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry. Well, there's a comedian and impressionist called Rory Bremner, and most of our viewers tonight will have heard or have seen Rory Bremner. And I want to remind everybody of a sketch that he did in the late 1980s, at the time when electricity and gas was being sold off to make money for private shareholders by the Thatcher drink. And one of the friends says to the other, "You're looking awful sad. What's wrong with you?" And his pal says, "Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible." He says, "I got my car stolen last night." And his pal says, "Oh, that's really bad. That's really bad." And his friend says, "It's worse than that. It's worse than that. The guy who stole it chapped my door this morning and he's offered to sell it back to me." His pal looks shocked and he says, "Wait a wee minute. That's theft." And his pal replies, "No, that's privatisation." And that's what we have to understand. That underpinned the whole privatisation programme. The people across the UK had spent billions in taxes over many years to develop the electricity grid, to develop the gas reserves, to make sure that telecommunications was available. We spent the money to build these industries, and they were part of the national UK wealth. Thatcher comes along and tells us, by the way, I'm privatising it. But see, if you want some of it, you can buy it. You can buy shares. Why would you buy shares in something we already owned? That's the disaster and the disgrace that privatisation was. And quite frankly, we have to, in an independent Scotland, make sure we reverse those privatisations. We never allowed water to go, by the way, Mark. We need to remind everybody, we could have, and this is a dead important thing here, because Strathclyde Regional Council held a referendum on whether Scotland's water should be privatised or not. And it was a referendum that had no legislative power whatsoever. It was a consultative referendum. Westminster had no say in that referendum. They said they wouldn't recognise a referendum. They said it was a waste of money. The Tories attacked Strathclyde Regional Council for holding the referendum. And over 90% of people voted to keep Scotland's water public. Guess what? When it came to the privatisation of water, even Westminster couldn't go against that size of that vote. And Scotland's water has remained public, whereas England and Wales's water is now private. And you see the result: raw sewage getting pumped in to the rivers and the lakes all across England. Warnings going up in this hot weather down there, telling people stay away from all of these lakes and rivers because it's not safe to swim in it because it's full of raw sewage. Yeah. That's privatisation.
Yeah, I think Noam Chomsky pointed out that the way that it's privatized is that you have a well-functioning public service. You run it into the ground, people get angry, and then you privatize it basically because of you justify the privatization because of, and we can see that with the railroads. We can see that with pretty much everything that's been privatized over the past few years.
You see, that's a very important point, Mark, because that's exactly what's happening to our health service now. And people have to understand this. I see it all the time. I hear it all the time. And that is, I'm waiting too long for an operation. I'm waiting too long to see a doctor. What they're doing right now, the Tories, is they're starving the NHS of the required resources, the required staffing levels, so that more and more people start to complain. And then they come in with, oh, by the way, here's a private company, and they promise you'll get seen within a day, you'll get seen within a week. I've had family members, extended family members. One was a pensioner who had cataracts, lost her ability to have confidence walking. Her balance was going because of the cataracts. She went to the doctor. The doctor says, "Oh no, you need to get this cataract operation." She got referred to the health service, and she got told 2 years. 2 years. Now, the woman is 82 years of age and she's told to wait 2 years for a cataract operation. Fortunately for her, she's got some money, so she's got some savings. So she went to the private sector where the same consultants who told her to wait 2 years did it in 2 weeks. That's the reality of creeping privatisation. We need to be aware that that's what they're doing. The Chomsky model and the Chomsky explanation is spot on. What they do all the time is they cut public services to make them unpopular, to make them administratively slow, and then they say, oh, by the way, here's this brand new shiny one, but it's in the private sector. They did it with the railways, they did it with the water and the electricity in England. And now look at the mess they're in. So we have to be absolutely clear about that.
Yeah, I think I actually, living in France, I think they've got a pretty good model for balancing public and private. I think most of the big hospitals are public, but you have a lot of private clinics, but it's all dealt with under the same system of national insurance. And so whether you go to a public or a private, there may be advantages for either one. Generally, the private clinics are maybe a little more rapid than the public hospitals, but it's all taken care of the same way with the insurance card, with the carte vitale. So there are models out there that could balance the public and the private without like privatizing everything and making everything based on corporate profits and I
think, Mark, you know the figures because having lived in France or still living in France, you'll know the figures. But when you hear this absolute crap from the Tories about oil, the energy prices, the cost of living. It's an international problem.
No.
And yet you look at our prices have went up something like 200-300%. In France, I think they've went up 4%.
Something like
And
that. I
they've
haven't
now extended, haven't they? The
I haven't
EDF
noticed
has
it.
extended
Yeah.
its ownership of the electricity. And
Yeah.
people have to understand that in actual fact, and it's so stupid, the people across the UK who get their energy supplied by EDF
Right.
are subsidising the lower gas and electricity prices in France for ordinary people. That's the absolute ridiculous situation with privatisation.
They have done some privatization in France, but the government always kept a controlling interest. They never let it. They never let the private ownership and the shares, the shareholders go beyond 50% of the value. And I think when they sold it, I heard it was around 70% that was owned by the government, and they just bought out the rest. I guess they just sent they sent the shareholders a check for whatever value they had in shares, and now it's controlled by the government. And and their COVID response was very good. A lot of stuff was shut down, but everyone was paid. I know they had a furlough program in the UK as well, but everybody was paid like 80%. I think that a lot of the commercial real estate, things like restaurants, they were supported. So even though there was no customers, they could still stay afloat. Financially. So when it was over, you could come back and, things have gone pretty much back to normal, where I don't think it's the case.
But the point is, your government, or the French government, was able to intervene and freeze energy prices because they own the bloody energy company. And that's what the British governments can't do. And a Scottish government couldn't do that either if we were independent. That's why we need a publicly owned Scottish energy company, so that we can actually control the energy prices, and we can control investment in our wind, in our wave, in our solar. We have in Scotland, Mark, we have got an absolute abundance of natural resources. We could be, people have said in terms of wind and wave power, clean energy, we're the Saudi Arabia of clean energy in terms of comparisons with oil. But you know what? We're not going to be the Saudi Arabia of clean energy production unless we own the bloody thing. We can't just sell off these licenses and hope that we'll get wee bits for the table. We need to own the bloody companies in order to get the maximum benefit from clean energy production.
Yeah. And how do you see that happening? Okay, assuming there's a referendum next year, vote for independence, begin negotiation with Westminster, and who knows how it'll turn out. But what do you see as the way to to nationalize? These. Do you just pay the shareholders whatever the value of their shares are, and take it back into public ownership, or how do you?
Not at all, Mark. Mark, these are all questions of political will. These are not legal questions, because when you have got a bill before Parliament to take back something that used to belong to the people, then you decide what the level of compensation is. And in my opinion, it should be compensation, and people on benefits will know exactly this particular phrase that I'm going to use. It will be compensation based on proven need. People have to prove. They get means tested before they get council tax benefit. They get means tested before they get any help with credits in terms of supplementing wages. Well, you know what? I'm fed up with the poor getting means tested. When are we going to means test the rich? When are we going to get the shareholders proving that they need to be compensated because they're down to only their second yacht and their third holiday home? Let's get the pensioners and the single parents and people on benefit, get them on a committee of inquiry, and they should determine proven need in terms of compensation. So that's a very, very much a political question, not a legal question.
Okay. How do you, I didn't want to address this too much, but I'm just wondering about your reaction to the death of the Queen and the absolutely over the top media coverage, and these, the way that she was put in lying in state in St. Giles, and everybody was saying, oh, the Scots are so wonderful. They love the Queen so much. They're turning out en masse, and this is going to cement the union, and all of this, I could use a vulgar word to describe it, but how do you see that, and especially since Prince Andrew is now the Earl of Aberdeenshire, Inverness, and he's also apparently a stand-in for the king, and just the whole thing of even having a king. How do you react to the same situation? Because in my view, Elizabeth, was able to at least maintain the illusion that she stayed out of politics, that she wasn't politically involved. I don't think Charles is able to do that. I think that he, in my view, based on his past behavior that we know about, he's going to be a much more interventionist king, at least publicly. And I can't see that, boding well for any sense any sense of legitimacy that the royalty may have had at one point. So I know that's a convoluted question, but just give me
during the referendum, Mark, there was 3 questions that I used to raise at the meetings. I had the pleasure during the referendum in 2014 of addressing over 120 meetings, and I used to say that the white paper that we were fighting the independence campaign on was okay. It was a start, but there were 3 areas that had to be addressed. One was the currency, and I said I disagreed with the white paper of the idea of sticking with a Bank of England and the English pound. I wanted their own currency. I wanted their own Scottish bank, and I wanted their own currency. Second one was the European Union. The white paper specifically said want to stay in the European Union. I disagreed with that. But the third question was on the monarchy and the idea of retaining the monarchy. And some people within the SNP leadership in particular were saying, oh, well, we'll still keep the Queen as our head of state. It'll be a slimmed down monarchy. And I used to say, Mark, I'm not interested in slim fast or any form of diet for the monarchy. I just want them abolished. Why? Because we're in the 21st century and I believe in democracy. I don't believe anybody through birthright has got any power or privilege over me. And I don't think we should have a society that is made up of subjects. I want a society made up of citizens, educated, wealthy, healthy citizens in a Scottish democratic republic. That's what I want. I despise the institution of monarchy, the royalties. I try and differentiate the individuals from the institution, but it's very, very difficult when you've got a proven nonce who's in the line for the throne, someone whom gets arrested for shouting out the obvious, that the guy is a nonce in Edinburgh, and he gets arrested.
He called him a sick old man, right? Sick old man.
From my point of view, Mark, there are some people who feel a sense of loss because they were invested in the monarchy and they respected the monarchy, and that's up to them, by the way. It's a bit like religion, Mark. People have got faith. Some people, Catholics, Protestants, whatever. I don't mind it whatsoever. You have your faith. It's not my cup of tea, but you're entitled to your faith. What you're not entitled to do, I think it was the actress Maggie Smith used to say, she says religion was a bit like a penis. She didn't mind you having one, but she objected to you taking it out and waving it in her face. And that's the way I look at monarchy.
That's beautiful.
You might be a monarchist, but don't try and wave it in my face, because I think it's a despicable institution that has got no place in a modern democracy. And as far as I'm concerned, Elizabeth has died, so should the institution of monarchy. Prince Charles is not my king. He's certainly not the King of Scotland, in my opinion. However, others will disagree. But in an independent Scotland, I want us to be a modern democratic republic. And I do have to make this final wee observation, Mark, that you've got a situation now where the monarchy and the institution of the monarchy is being used, is being manipulated by the British establishment to try and get everybody to forget about the cost of living crisis, to forget about the energy rises. You've got strikes getting called off this week precisely because of a funeral. The truth is, people are going to waken up on Tuesday, the night, the 20th. They're going to waken up, and their problems are going to be just as bad, if not worse, than they were before the Queen's funeral. And from that point of view, these problems are not getting solved by this forced, artificial mourning that has got a place in places like Korea, in North Korea, where we're told it's dictatorships. They don't have a place. How dare they try and corral us into mourning for someone who meant nothing to us? If people want to watch things like that, they should have special stations for it. The truth is, you can't turn on your telly, you can't turn on a radio, but it's wall-to-wall coverage. And if you don't mourn, you're made to feel guilty. Yeah. That's ridiculous, Mark. It's a disgrace.
Yeah, and it's not only the institution of the monarchy, but the entire aristocratic system: the dukes, the earls, the viscounts,
the hangers on, as I call them. I like to call them the hangers on.
But they're still baked into the political system, the UK political system. And almost every Scot I know doesn't subscribe to that at all. And you still got these landowners like the Duke of Buccleuch, Alistair Jack apparently is a big landowner in Scotland, and many others that are, desperate to keep the union intact, so to maintain their privileges, even though it's completely, and even though, again, almost all Scots I know are totally opposed to this notion of aristocratic privilege. Almost all Scots I know are much more egalitarian and much more down to earth than these, highfalutin, aristocrats. So, that is much more appropriate to, the home counties in England than to Scotland. And so
I definitely think the institution's dying, Mark. I know they're trying to stoke the flames without all the coverage, and trying to say that it's very, very popular. Opinion polls in Scotland show that the monarchy is less popular in Scotland than anywhere else across the UK. But the truth is, having somebody there for 70 years gave some people a bit of continuity, particularly the elderly. I think they felt a bit of a relationship with somebody that's been there that long. But the idea that anybody's going to have any faith in Prince Bloody Charles is just rubbish. That it's just not there. The monarchy is dying before our very, very eyes. And when the Queen is buried on Monday, I believe it's the beginning of the end for the institution.
Mm-hmm. I certainly hope so, and I'm sure that most people would agree. Okay, and let's see. Is there? We're kind of wrapping up. Is there anything else you wanted to address while we're?
Well, there were a number of. I hate no answering questions, and there were a few come in there. I see one fail. I think it's for Lenny. Says, do you remember being in the holding cells with me in the 90s? So I may have been one of the holding cells during the anti-poll tax struggles, where we were arrested several times during that. Or it could have been Faz Lane. I'm not sure. And then there's another one about our referendums legally binding in Scotland, and again that's to do with whether we as a Scottish Parliament determine that we are going to recognise the result of a referendum. As I said earlier, the Strathclyde Regional Council held a referendum on water privatisation. It wasn't legally binding, but it was politically powerful. And the referendum that we can hold next year, if the Scottish Parliament has the guts and the cojones to actually call it, it may not be legally binding, but it will be politically potent. That's the reason we need to hold it. Okay. So I would, in terms of winding up, Mark, you've given me a wee invite there, and I appreciate that. My wind up is to say to everybody in Scotland here who believes that Scotland should determine its own future, that we should take our own decisions. You can't get what you want by sitting on your arse doing nothing. We need to get out and we need to display our support for independence. We need to get the flags looked out. We need to get the T-shirts ironed, and we need to get to Edinburgh on the 1st of October and march with all under one banner. And then on the 8th of October, You need to get to Glasgow, get to the Freedom Square, George Square in Glasgow, and have a fantastic day first and foremost, because there's going to be, it's called the Yestival because it's going to be predominantly music from independent supporting artists who are turning up and playing free of charge, or giving up their time, giving up their effort, giving up their day to entertain everyone. But there'll be speeches interspersed, and we will be standing there together in the square to say loud and clear to Westminster and the rest of the world, we will be heard. We will not be denied. That's what we need to be there to say. And if there's only a few hundred of us, they'll ignore us. Make sure there's thousands of us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what, and in conclusion, what length, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, if you do it this way, it'll be an illegal referendum. It'll be like Catalonia. Nobody will recognize you. And what would you say to that? I mean, I personally don't think that the British state would have the violent reaction against the referendum that was in Catalonia, where they literally sent in the Guardia Civil, beat protesters. I don't see that happening, but I could. But I mean, how would
Mark,
you react?
Every country has its own history, its own traditions.
Sure.
Things happen in France that wouldn't happen in the UK. Things happened in Spain, a country that used to be. Let's remember, it wasn't that long ago. It was a fascist state. It's a fascist bloody state. So the idea of violence against people expressing a democratic right in Catalonia, it's part and parcel of the DNA of that fascistic state. We don't have that. We don't have that tradition. There has been violence in the past. Don't get me wrong. Peterloo, people don't learn about Peterloo in Manchester. They learn about Waterloo, but they don't learn about Peterloo. They don't learn about the fact that in Glasgow in 1919, we were under 3 days of martial law because people were voting. Were striking for the right to work no more than 40 hours a week. So yes, there is violence within the history of the UK, particularly overseas. I mean, the Union flag is called the butcher's apron for a reason. It's because it's dripping with the blood of people who have been brutalised and had pillaged and had their resources taken from them all across the planet. So we know that violence is in the DNA of the British state, but they have avoided using it openly in the actual shores of the UK. I don't think there'll be a violent reaction when Scotland votes overwhelmingly in a referendum, even though they're going to say, oh, well, we're not going to take notice of it. If people vote overwhelmingly for independence, then the European Union will take note of it. The United Nations will take note of it. Other countries across the planet will take note of it, and we will be able to declare that we are in an independent state.
Okay. Anything else you would like to add before we say goodbye?
Just to thank you and the Independence, the live guys, for giving us the opportunity. Please keep up the good work. We've got a horrible so-called free media, which is a misnomer, should be done under the Trades Description Act, of course, because there is no such thing as a free media. There is a bought, sold and paid for media which promotes and defends the British establishment at every single turn, and the rich and the powerful who own it. So please keep up the work that you do, guys. But please also, in the run-up to both the 1st of October and the 8th of October, please use the platform you've got to encourage independent supporters to hit the streets together. United, we march.
Okay. I also wanted to conclude by telling our audience that the SSRG, the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, of which I'm the founder, we're going to be holding an event on the 29th of October when I'm able to make it over there. We don't know exactly, but it's going to be something like the Union on Trial. We're going to be having a lot of, we haven't worked out the format exactly, but we're going to be going through a history of the Union, both historically since the claim of right, Culloden, all of the other things that have happened, and especially now, what is the price of being in the Union compared to what the benefits of independence would bring. So again, we'll certainly let everybody know more about that, and everybody's warmly invited. But just to let you know, we will be holding an event on the 29th of Saturday, the 29th of October, regarding the State of the Union, or again, we haven't worked out the exact format, but just to let people know about that. Okay, so if you want to stick around for a couple minutes, Tommy, just to debrief after, but unless you have anything else to add, thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure as always, Tommy.
Great.
Okay.